Welcome to Wise Women's Stories, a podcast where we dive deep into the essence of womanhood, intuition, transformation, and becoming. I'm Edwina Murphy-Droomer, and rather than skimming the surface, we're here to unravel the true essence of womanhood and the layers that shape and define us. We invite you as you enter this sacred space to take a moment of solitude with just your thoughts, a comfortable chair, a warm cup of tea, and your journal.
And I'm Inarra, Aryane, Griffyn. Together we explore the journeys of women who have weathered decades of highs and lows and are now poised to discover deeper mysteries and mastery on their personal development journey. In each episode, we invite you to join us as we work to help you uncover honest insights and share profound stories that empower women to embrace their most authentic, wild, natural selves. Delighted to be here, season 2, and we are wading through one of my favorite books of influence on me called Daughters of Copper Woman by Anne Cameron. And though Anne Cameron would take the credit for this, and quite rightly should in some way of putting this body of work together, actually these are Indigenous stories of the West Coast First Nation Canadian people. And so they were oral stories that came down the line for, hundreds of thousands of years. And the subject that we get onto today is a tough subject. So, it's a little bit about the histories of the invasions that came to these people and all the conquering colonial sadness that goes with that. So it's a tough one, but it's also a very powerful one of the experience of women in those situations. So shall we begin? I am going to just read a little bit and then we'll break it up. So the chapter is called The Women's Society. In my ancient text, which I believe might be 1981, and Edwina has a very different book, it's on page 47.
It's 55 in the newer one, page 55 in the newer one.
So this is the Women's Society. And then the world turned upside down. Strange men arrived in dugouts with sails that smelled terrible and were infested with bright-eyed creatures, the like of which had never been seen on the island. People were living almost as they were intended to live, almost. And the Society of Women was strong. It was intertribal, open to all women regardless of age, social status, political status, or wealth. No woman could buy her way into the society. No woman could inherit a position in the society. Each member of the society had been chosen by the society itself and invited to join because of one of the sisters. Even slave women could belong to the society if they were invited, and their owners could not deny them the right to join, nor keep them from the meetings, nor forbid them permission to join in the ceremonies, for the society was powerful and respected by all. The education of all girl children was the duty of the members of the Women's Society. They taught with jokes and with songs, with legends and with examples. They taught the girls how to care for and enjoy their bodies, how to respect themselves and their bodily functions. They explained to them all they would ever need to know about pregnancy, childbirth, and childcare. And then the world turned upside down. So I want to just stop there for a moment because the thing that really stands out to me is the slave bit. That it's like, all women from all wealth and status and this and that can be part of the Women's Society, including slaves who are owned. I mean, it's brazen. It's straight up and out there that slavery was part of this culture. And for us, I think, I know because I've studied history, slaves were pretty much in every different culture. It didn't matter, black on black, white on white, Native American on Native American, Greek on Greek, it goes on. And we have this idea, because our modern slavery conversation is really, the big one is about American, owning slaves in the States and the disruption that that's caused. But a little piece of, Edwina's mentioned this in a previous conversation, that we can have the eyes of the golden-eyed past, that it was all beautiful once. And I've noticed this in so many different realms, like even, for instance, going through the situation that I went with a terminal illness at one point 30 years ago. And there were people who would tell me, oh, you have to do homeopathy. That's the only way forward. You can only do that because all allopathic medicine is bad and all the ancient ways and this and that. And I always dwell in the ancient ways, right? But I actually believe that these statements that you get of, one realm is so wrong and we look back to the past like it was so right. Well, sorry to mention, but in medieval Europe, etc., during the wars, you would lose your legs and whatever to gangrene because it was missing some of the modern allopathic medicine. And we've got the same attitude here that, it's all about the colonial situation, which we're going to get to in this story. But actually, no, slavery was an indigenous precedent. It was existing in there. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that at this juncture, Edwina.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not so much about the slavery side of it, but about the, our great desire for everything to be all or nothing, like it's all this way or all that way. And I think when it comes to the medical model, which is, a very passionate topic for me with a background in naturopathy and, if I can possibly turn to Mother Nature first for food, medicine, anything, then I will. But modern medicine has, saved the life of my child at one point who had meningitis. So I'm very, very grateful for it. I think the problem lies in when we give godlike status to the medical profession, or godlike status to people high up in the church, or godlike status to politicians, or, this desire to believe that somebody has all the answers is actually where we fall into great peril, I believe.
Yeah, and it's this, I agree, it's like a black and white statement that this world is just, there's right and wrong, good, bad, black, white, etc., and there's no nuances. And without nuances, you can't actually understand that you can have somebody who was born a beautiful little baby and grew up, and then some episode happened to them, and that their choices and their behavior after that are really not great. But the compassion is the energy that we can look at this story for sure with that. And, being white women, and I will say this, very obviously we're white, and I'm extremely white, blonde. I am aware that I'm an archetype that is difficult sometimes for women of color. And therefore, one of the things that had happened in my life was, because I'm used to Indigenous teachings of Britain and Ireland and Scotland, and they were like, well, that's not Indigenous. I'd go to circles with women of color who were teaching Indigenous teachings, and they're like, no, that's not Indigenous. That's colonialism. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Actually, it's Indigenous from every part of the earth. Yeah. And also a little sideline on that is that just because of where you came from doesn't mean that's the only access to it that you have with sacred teachings. For instance, if I was to only teach where I came from, that's Yorkshire. And, I've said this many times before, they don't dance in Yorkshire, right? It's a missing genetic trait. They don't dance. I love to dance. And so I will dance at all celebrations and in ceremony and all of this. Now, but Yorkshire people sing, so they've got the sea shanties and all of that. Does it mean when we get down to it with this, oh, the word's gone out of my head, where you're only supposed to do what your culture does, or cultural appropriation? There is also an absurdity in some of that as well. It's like, so I say, only Yorkshire people can sing sea shanties, and it's not for anyone else. It's like, or you're messing with it. So there's again, it's the black, white, the layers of this, and it's a tricky conversation. But I think it's worth us really just saying this is. You'll hear it. We're about to hear the colonial piece right here. So there was slavery, and then the world turned upside down. Strange men arrived in dugouts with sails that smelled terrible and were infested with sharp-faced, bright-eyed creatures, the like of which had never been seen on the island. These men wanted water and food, and they wanted trees for masts. They wanted women, for it seemed as if they had none of their own. Their teeth were pitted and black, their breath smelled, their bodies were hairy. They never purified themselves with sweating and swimming. They talked in loud voices. They wanted otter and seal skin and were willing to pay with things such as the people had never even dreamed. And the world turned upside down. So this is the explorer era, when, you know, ships were being sent from Britain and Holland and Spain, etc., to explore on behalf of Europe. And then the indigenous people got sick. They died in ways they had never known. Children coughed until they bled from the lungs and died. Children choked on things that grew from the sickness in their throats. Children were covered with running sores and died vomiting black blood. Nobody was safe, not the slaves, not the commoners, not the nobility, not the royalty. Entire villages died of sickness or killed each other in the madness that came from drinking the strange liquid the foreigners gave for seal and otter skins. So we start with that invasion. So this is the invasion of the colonialists, and the decimation of these people was, well, we know about it. It's that they were just decimated with illness that, all the colonialists brought, and they were treated like dirt. And I know that one of the most unpleasant, famous sayings in Canada from, he'll come to me, he's one of the first prime ministers of Canada, and he was Scottish. And, you know, when you look at the history of the Scottish who went to Canada, they were often persecuted in their own land. They had terrible times in Scotland. They were poor and starving, and they were puritanical as hell. And when they arrived, they set up the governments of Canada. So there's a big Scottish link in Canada, and it's this Puritan thing that goes on. And he said, we're going to take the Indian out of the Indian. That was the main focus on it. So you imagine these people coming, and they don't even see the Indigenous as human. All they want is they want their goods. And this was the beginning of the seal trading and for Europe trading episode. And it was appalling. And there's nothing to say about it except that. But the second bit, and then the new men arrived. Men who never talked to women, never ate with women, never slept with women, never laughed with women. Men who frowned on singing and dancing, on laughter and love. Men who claimed the society of women was a society of witches. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, they insisted, but the people would not allow them to kill the women of the society. Instead, the priests had to be content to take the girl children. Instead of being raised and educated by women who told them the truth about their bodies, the girls were taken from their villages and put in schools where they were taught to keep their breasts bound, to hide their arms and legs, to never look a brother openly in the eye, but to look down at the ground as if ashamed of something. Instead of learning that once a month their bodies would become sacred, they were taught they would become filthy. Instead of going to the waiting house to meditate, pray, and celebrate the fullness of the moon and their own bodies, They were taught they were sick and must bandage themselves and act as if they were sick. They were taught the waves and surging of their bodies were sinful and must never be indulged or enjoyed. By the time the girls were allowed home to their villages, their minds were so poisoned, their spirits so damaged, their souls so contaminated, they were not eligible for candidacy in the society of women. The boys were taken away too, and taught that women were filthy, sinful creatures who would tempt a man away from his true path. They were taught women had no opinion that counted, no mind to be honored, no purpose other than to serve men. And in less than a generation, the world turned upside down, and all reason and truth flowed out and was nearly lost. The elder sisters died with tears in their eyes because their young women were not prepared to learn how to love their own bodies. Who cannot love herself cannot love anybody. Who is ashamed of her body is ashamed of all of life. Who finds dirt or filth in her body is lost. And who cannot respect the gifts given even before birth can never respect anything fully. So they say at this point the priests had destroyed the matriarchy. And it's a good place to stop because or to pause. And this has gone on and on and on and is still current, that women who have periods are dirty, that the life cycle itself is dirty and messy, and, that men could control it, so that we've had doctors who give women giving birth on their backs, which is an absurdity. All of that. And you can see how these people were really affected. Well, we too were affected. I often say, once the priests had destroyed and done the witch hunts in Europe, destroyed all the indigenous teachings of Europe with the witch hunts, they then went out and colonialized everybody else and did it there, So we're speaking of witch hunts really at this point, and this twisted level of, the Catholic, it was not just that, it was the Jesuits, it was just puritanical. This is also missionary mentality, where you're not good enough in your own right, and we're going to make you better. So it's a sad, sad period. I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Where do you even start? It's interesting. There's two things that I want to bring forward here. One is, something that I love to talk about in my community is the understanding that we're all a product of our environment. So when we think about the priests and, monks, or, the people that were part of, I've lost the word, when they set up communities in Indigenous places of priests and monks, and then, brought Christianity into Indigenous cultures. I do believe that at its foundation, the people that were doing that thought that they were doing the right thing. Whatever the programming was that they had grown up with, they came with the intention, and then there was evil that came from that, when that comes with the power to abuse that happened. And I think it's, I do think it's always really, you and I are a product of our environment. Our beliefs are our beliefs because of the way that we've been raised and the people that we've surrounded ourselves with, and every person on the planet, the same thing applies. So whether we have a belief about a particular religion or anything else, it comes from the environment that we are in. And so I think, when we look at the result, it's the one thing that we can take from history is the lessons. It's easy to look at it and name something as evil or bad or good and right. But rather than doing that, let's look at it as the lessons. And this is where curiosity is our best friend and our greatest teacher. If we can look at all this stuff and go, okay, so if they felt they were doing the right thing? What was it about these women that was so threatening? What was it about these women that made the priests feel that it was taking away control from somebody else, or taking away power from somebody else, or creating fear? I mean, we do these atrocities because we're afraid of something, whether we're yelling at somebody
Really?
in the street or whatever else it is. We do things because we're afraid. And so what were they afraid of? What was the great threat that made the people, the priests that committed these atrocities? And I mean, the idea of burning another human being alive is, it beggars any form of understanding how somebody can do that. But there was something in their environment that made them feel so threatened that they somehow felt that that was the way to go. So I think that is the deepest question here.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is that really jumped out at me, one of Brene Brown has been one of my greatest mentors, and it was in one of her teachings that she talked about discovering that you cannot love anybody else more than you love yourself. And for some reason, well, reasons that I know, but I won't go into in this conversation, that jumped out as a really profound understanding. And then to see that come up in these stories that are thousands of years old, we didn't need statistics, we didn't need deep research of thousands of people to come up with this information. It's here from stories. And this is, this is the bit about learning this wisdom from ancient teachings. In the newer copy that I have on page 59, which Innara read, it's that short poem of who cannot love herself, cannot love anybody, who is ashamed of her body is ashamed of all life. That is just, can you imagine if every child was taught that, whether male or female?
Totally. It's mind blowing. I mean, it's
so
like freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we're not taught how to love ourselves and love our bodies, we can't pass that love on to anybody else.
No.
We can't.
No, not at all.
And I grappled with this. So as a listener, I understand if you're grappling with this. When I first heard it, I was like, but I love my kids. But there is another level of love that is so much greater when you learn to love yourself and love your own body. It's a really pivotal piece of this story that is so key.
Yeah, I mean,
if those priests loved themselves, they could not have done what they did. They couldn't have.
Exactly. And I think what we've got here is we're just seeing the trauma response from one generation to another to another.
Yeah.
I know one thing that my father said to me when we were talking about colonialism. He said one of the things that people don't understand is that the class system in Britain was so extreme that, and those people are the ones that often colonized, right? They're the ones who left and to find a better life, but they brought all this mess with them. If the lord or lady or whomever was walking into the house and you were a gardener, you would have to face the hedge. You'd have to turn away and face the hedge. You were such lowly, considered nothing that, you couldn't even look upon these people, etc. Well, that's who then colonized. So they take that trauma and they pass it on to everybody else. So there's usually a scapegoat. You were asking why was there a huge history with women and the misogyny that still goes on. It's a great scapegoat, great population. Then they've done it with anything that is different. anything that is other. But when you had women who were empowered, as I said in the last episode, with birth, the ultimate power is life itself. And though they knew probably that there was some connection with the man, you don't visibly see it at the end of the journey. You don't see the male energetic there. It's a kind of, ironically, it's the hidden one in that. When live birth is seen, it's the women who are giving birth. Therefore, they were considered extremely powerful manifestors. And so it becomes the great scapegoat. You know, anything that you can, there's nothing new here, right? This is the history of trauma being passed on and on and on and on, and just taking a different form. And that I think is a very high level. Right now, we need to take the higher level rather than dropping down into the, you can have evidence of every trauma and why it's so bad for you. But what you end up with is you end up wallowing in a victim mentality rather than taking the lesson, learning it. And I do believe that there's a space for the victim where you actually need to listen and have a space where it's just you listen to the trauma and you experience with them as best you can. But then after that, it's like with our children, it's not, hey, stay there. It's like that was part of the process of releasing the trauma. And then from now we need to build you up. And we've got the build up is right there. It's self-love. And yeah, it's profound.
It is. And it's so breathtakingly simple that it feels like it needs to be more complicated. And this is where the beauty lies, in the fact that it is simple, and simple isn't easy, but it is simple. You know, if we focused on that one thing.
Exactly. And, you know, what they talk about here is that it was a devastating history. And that the damage that was done in that moment, or those moments, they're very short periods of time, actually. Like, you know, I think the Indian Wars, as they called it in the States, was 30 years. I mean, can you imagine? 30 years, you've erased an entire population. I have always looked at it like, what's the thread there? What is the piece that is, you know, a deeper level that we're looking at right now? And it's property. When you've got a concept where Indigenous didn't believe that you owned the land, then you've got invaders coming in who want to own something. Women in historical periods of matriarchy were representatives of the land. They were the land itself. They were Mother Nature. They were Earth. And when Earth becomes possible to be property, and when women become possible to be property, which you can see still, the dowry system, the this and the that, you know, you are moved like a pawn to get the guy into the position to lead something, right? This is it's the dark patriarchy, right? It's dark side of the patriarchy. So property is a big piece that we need to step away from. Like, actually, we are all mothers of our daughters. We are all, it's like the tribe. It takes the tribe to raise a child. We, you know, it's stepping away from this ownership thing. And I think it's a really big piece in this, that we think we own freaking everything. You know, that's mine, yeah, it's yours, and da-da-da-da-da. And if we could step into a much higher level, we are guardians of this beautiful planet. We are guardians of the children on it. What are we going to do to stop this separation, this constant conflict with I'm better than you, you're better than me, etc. You're right, I'm wrong.
I just got the most beautiful visual in my mind as you were talking about that. You know, it's like a flower with its seeds, and the seeds get spread across the earth with more flowers. It's like our children. The flower doesn't go, well, they're my seeds, they must grow next to me. And, you know, like it's like this, a continuation of Mother Earth.
Yeah. And that kind of the idea of, rather than ownership, guardian, shifting to guardian of all these things. In my own life, because I haven't had children, I've ended up with these spirit daughters, I call them, and having very strong relationships with much younger men as well, actually, who adore my strength. It's not like, oh, you're a strong woman, scary. It's like, oh, basking in the wisdom and that's been something that I've been aware of. That no, I didn't have physical children, but I've, my best friend's daughter is my spirit daughter, and she relates to me very much in that way. And funnily enough, we ended up, her mum, Nyla, I love you so much if you ever hear this. But Nyla is an opera singer, and she's musical, and she's got all of the arts and whatever. And so does the father. Father has great music and all of this. They speak many languages. But Gita, who is my spirit daughter, we had a conversation not that long ago. I took her to her first ayahuasca trip with her mother. And when she was about 21, and she ran off with the shamans. I mean, she's got this huge shamanic teaching connection. She's been to Brazil. She's been like way more than I have in that particular culture. But she was over here after being in Brazil, and she was saying, I got those genes from you. I got all of that permission from you. I'm like, yeah, because I'm another mother,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how to raise them up, to just, you have got to love yourself. You've got to teach them to love themselves. We have to love ourselves as we get older,
Yeah, absolutely. And, like we're role modeling this for the next generation of girls, what it looks like. And I remember, when I did an interview series for mothers with teenage girls years ago. And in, part of what I talked about in there is like, what are we making womanhood look like? Because at the moment, I'm hearing this generation of girls that don't want to grow up because being a woman looks like there's no fun. They're exhausted, they're tired, they're grumpy, they're resentful. It's like we need to look at ourselves.
Yeah.
What are we making womanhood look like? It's like this reverence for life or a misery to be endured,
emulated. I know. Yeah.
And I mean, we can all fall into the trap. I've been there, but it's this reminder of we're role models. Whether you have children or not, there's younger generation are looking, they're watching.
Yeah, they are. So, I mean, this chapter is a tough one, right? Because it brings in some of the history, whereas other is more kind of fantasy. But what happens is, in short, the women's society is really decimated as well, right? Because you used to have to be of a certain level to enter it. You had to be invited. You had to be at a certain level. So even if you were nobility or you had wealth, if you didn't have a certain way of being, you still wouldn't be invited into the women's society. But a slave, for instance, who is invited because of her particular attributes can be part of it. So it's a very interesting mix of who was originally in the women's society, holding the rituals and the knowledge. And then what happens with this decimation through colonialization and also the priests, the particular kind of poisoning of that, it falls apart. And what they talk about is there are certain seeds that disappear forever. If you've never had an interruption of a pure essence, then yes, it's going to be altered. But once it is altered with this disturbance and the poisoning of the priests, then it goes underground, and then it starts to build in a different way. It builds more powerfully because it's got to have resistance. It's got to learn certain things. And so the women's society goes quite underground at this point. And I know that when she talks about there was a permission given to her to be allowed to, at this point, make these stories open for Westerners, and that it was like a calling. I can't remember the quote we've talked about. The Dalai Lama said something about Western women. I wish I could remember the exact quote.
The world will be saved by the Western woman.
That's right. So he said it too. Well, also in this, further on in the tale, the Women's Society goes a bit underground, but there's a point when it comes out again, and she is given permission to write this book because they want to get the message to Western women as well. So Western women have got a big part to play now in releasing these stories.
Yeah. And it's, like we've been given these platforms for a reason. We're not just talking to the people in our community now that we can talk, we can have these conversations across the globe. Yeah. As you and I are right now, literally opposite sides of the globe.
It's completely amazing. So I think it's a good place to leave it. Bit of a tough conversation there, and ways to look into tough conversations and into trauma, right? But we will resume, and there is one of the most powerful teachings that I've ever come across a little bit further from here. So I hope, listener, you are feeling like the anticipation doesn't end here at all. Yeah. It doesn't end in this phase.
I just want to read the very last sentence in this chapter. But the need is now, and old woman is with us and will help us and come to us when we most need her.
Bring on, old woman.
All right, beautiful souls. That's it from us for this episode. We will see you again soon. So much love, and bye for now.
So much love.